She crawled 4 hours through the worst blizzard in 20 winters with a dead man's secret sewn against her ribs and a name on a soaked letter she could barely read. When the cabin door finally opened, the man behind it had not spoken to a stranger in 3 winters. He did not know yet that the girl freezing on his porch was carrying the proof that would name his wife's killer. And neither did she. This is the story of the Snow Bride of Copper Ridge. Stay with me by the fire. The cabin door blew open under the weight of the wind, and Holt Calloway raised his Winchester before he raised his eyes. Nearly 3 years he had lived on this mountain. Nearly 3 years since the last living soul had climbed the trail to Copper Ridge in the dead of January, and that soul had been a half-frozen trapper looking for a place to die. Holt had buried him 2 days later under the cottonwood by the creek. Since then, nothing had come through that door he had not let through. Not man, not beast, not memory when he could help it. But something was coming through it now. The wind had a voice tonight, and the voice was carrying something that did not belong to it. A small sound, a weight, a hand that did not have the strength to knock twice. Holt stepped into the open doorway with the rifle low across his forearm, the way a man holds a tool he intends to use without thinking, and he saw her. She was small. That was the first thing, small the way a sparrow is small when the cat has it in the snow, and the cat has not yet decided. She wore a navy traveling dress that the storm had eaten through to the bone, and her hair, what he could see of it under the ice, was the color of honey held up to a winter sun. Her lips were the color of the violets that grew along the spring branch in May, except there was nothing alive about that color now. It was the color a body turned the hour before it stopped being a body. She lifted one hand toward him. In that hand was a folded square of paper soaked through the ink running down her wrist in long blue tears. He could not read it from where he stood, but he could see his own name on the front, written in a hand he did not recognize. Holt Calloway, Copper Ridge. He looked down at the letter. He looked up at the girl. He looked back over his shoulder at the 2 men standing behind him in the firelight, his brother Wyatt with the Colt already in his fist, and his brother Silas with the lantern raised high, and he said the words that he would remember every day of the 30 years he had left in this world. Get into my cabin. It's freezing outside. She took one step. The step was the last thing she had in her. She fell forward, and Holt caught her against his chest, the way a man catches a sack of grain that has been thrown to him from too far away. And the cold of her went straight through his coat and into the place under his ribs that he had thought was empty. Behind him, Copper, the old golden retriever, who had not let a stranger near the cabin in 3 winters, came forward without a sound and pressed his head against the girl's hanging hand. Copper knew. Dogs always knew first. Friends. Before we go any further into the story, I want to tell you something. If you love stories about good men in hard country, about loyalty and honor, and the kind of love a man earns with his hands and his patience, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I bring you a new frontier story every week. And while you're down there, leave me a comment and tell me where in this country you are listening from tonight. I'd like to know who's out there with me by the fire. Now, let's go back. 6 weeks back and 2,000 miles east to a city she would never see again. Boston in late November of 1883 was the gray color of wet stone. Adelaide Whitfield, who had been called Della by her mother, and by no one since her mother died, sat in the narrow office of Mrs. Pruitt at the St. Catherine Academy for Young Women, and folded her hands in her lap so they would not shake. Mrs. Pruitt was not a cruel woman. She was something worse. She was a tired woman, and tired women had run out of the soft words that other women still bothered to use. The Academy is closing, Adelaide. The trustees will not vote to keep it open past Christmas. You have until the new year to find a place. Della was 22 years old. She had lived in this house since she was 9. Since the night the kitchen lamp had broken in her mother's parlor and the curtain had caught and the fire had taken everything that ever belonged to her except a small cameo brooch the fireman had pulled from the ash. The brooch was at her throat now. She wore it the way some women wore a wedding ring. It was the only proof she had ever had a mother at all. "I have nowhere to go," she said. Mrs. Pruitt pushed three things across the desk. The first was a letter from a household in Beacon Hill that needed a parlor maid. Della knew the household. She knew the two grown sons in the household, and she knew what had happened to Margaret Tilbury and to little Jane Castor, who had worked there before. She did not touch that letter. The second was a paper from the city poorhouse on Deer Island. Mrs. Pruitt did not even look up when she pushed it forward. They both knew Della would not last a winter in that place. The third was a folded page torn from a newspaper called the Matrimonial Times. The advertisement had been circled with a thin pencil line. "Honest man in Montana Territory seeks wife. Travel paid. Promise of respect and protection. Reply C. Callaway, Copper Ridge." Della picked up the third paper. It weighed nothing in her hand. It weighed everything in her chest. She wrote her reply that night. She wrote it 3 times before she got it right. And the right version was the one where she did not ask any questions and did not make any promises. She told him she was an orphan. She told him she could read and write and cipher and that she had trained as a hospital nurse's assistant for 1 season. She told him she had no family to send for and no family to go back to. She told him she did not require romance. She required only kindness and a roof and the chance to be useful to someone who would not be cruel to her in return. She did not tell him she had never been kissed. She did not think it was the kind of thing a man wanted to hear in a letter. She thought wrong, but she did not know that yet. The reply came in 3 weeks, and it was not signed by C. Callaway at all. It was signed by W. Callaway with a note that said his brother was a man of few words and that the family would be honored if she would consider making the journey. Inside the envelope was $50 in worn paper, folded twice, and a stagecoach ticket as far as Helena, Montana Territory. Della packed everything she owned into a single small trunk. 3 dresses, the navy traveling, one she would wear a brown wool and a gray cotton for warm weather she did not yet believe existed. A Bible, a small book of poems by a woman named Emily Dickinson, who had lived not so far from here and had died only 2 years before. The cameo brooch she did not pack because she would wear it. And one other thing, which she did not yet know she was going to be given. The night before the train left, a woman came to the iron gate of the academy in a dress so black it ate the gas lamp light around her. She did not ring the bell. She waited. When Della came down to lock the gate for the night, the woman in black stepped forward and Della stepped back. "Are you Adelaide Whitfield?" the woman said. "The girl going west on the Callaway letter?" Della said yes before she remembered she should not have said anything at all. The woman looked over her shoulder the way an animal looks over its shoulder when there is something behind it that is not yet visible but is already coming. "My name is Cordelia Marsh," the woman said. "My husband's brother was Ezra Marsh. He kept a book. The book is the reason he is dead. The book is the reason I will be dead before the spring, most likely. I have tried 4 times to put this book into the hand of a federal man. 4 times the federal men have been bought before they could reach me. You are going to a place where the man who killed Ezra cannot reach you, because that man does not yet know your name. I am asking you to carry a thing for me. I am asking you to carry it to a marshal in Helena named Thaddeus Pike. He is the only honest badge left between here and the Pacific Ocean. Will you do it?" Della should have said no. Della was a careful girl and a frightened girl and a girl with no protector in the world. But she looked at Cordelia Marsh and she saw a woman who was already half a ghost, and she remembered her own mother and she said yes. Cordelia Marsh pressed a small, leather-bound book into Della's hands. The leather was old and the corners were soft from being held. Cordelia closed Della's fingers around it the way you close a child's fingers around a coin you want them to keep. "Tell no one," Cordelia said. "Trust no one until you are standing in front of Marshal Pike. If you must hide it on your body, not in your trunk. Trunks get stolen." Cordelia Marsh walked away from the gate, and Della never saw her again. That night, Della took the small leather book and sewed a hidden pocket into the lining of her traveling dress just under her left ribs, where a hand would have to be very rude to ever find it. She put the book inside the pocket. She did not open it. She thought, if I do not know what is in it, I cannot be made to tell. She thought wrong about that too. The journey took 11 days. Train to St. Louis, river packet some of the way, stagecoach the rest. Della watched the country flatten out and then rise up again, and the towns got smaller and the trees got bigger, and somewhere past the Dakotas, she opened the book in the privacy of her tiny stagecoach berth, just one page, just to see, and she closed it again with her hand pressed flat against her mouth. Numbers, names, dates, and one phrase that repeated like a heartbeat all the way down the page. Faked wait again, missing. She did not know what it meant in detail. She knew exactly what it meant in shape. Some man had been stealing for a long time, and Ezra Marsh had been writing it down for a long time, and Ezra Marsh was dead, and Cordelia Marsh would be dead by the spring, and now the only person between that book and a fire was a 22-year-old orphan in a navy dress. She closed the book. She did not open it again until she was sitting at Holt Calloway's table. The stagecoach put her down in Silver Creek on a Tuesday afternoon, and the sky over the Bitterroot Mountains was the color of an old bruise. A snowstorm was coming. Even Della, who had never seen the West before, could feel that the air had gone heavy in a way that had nothing to do with cold. Men were running horses to barn. Women were pulling laundry in off the lines. A boy was rolling barrels of feed under the porch of the general store. And in the middle of all that motion, one man was standing perfectly still on the steps of the Silver Creek Hotel, watching her. He was tall in the way some men are tall when they have spent a lifetime making sure no one stood over them. He wore a black coat that had cost more than the dress on Della's back had cost, and a watch chain across his vest that caught the gray light. His face was pleasant, his eyes were not. He came down off the steps and removed his hat and gave her a small bow that had nothing to do with respect. "You must be the young lady from Boston," he said. "I am Hollis Blackwood, president of the Silver Creek Mining Association and a friend to every traveler who comes through this town. There is a storm coming in tonight that will close the passes for a week. I would be a poor friend indeed if I let you try to ride out into it. The hotel has a clean room on me with my compliments. We will get you on your way the moment the weather breaks." Della had been raised in a charity school. Charity schools teach a girl to know the difference between a kindness and a trap. The man in front of her was holding a trap. She made her face soft. She made her voice grateful. She told him she would be most obliged to take a cup of tea in the dining room while her trunk was brought in, and would he excuse her one moment to refresh herself. She smiled at him. He smiled back. The smile did not reach the part of his eyes where intentions live. When she said the name Calloway, his face changed. It was not a big change. It was the change a frozen pond makes the moment before the ice gives way under a child. It lasted half a second. Then his pleasant face came back smoother than ever. "Calloway," he said. "The brothers up on Copper Ridge. Yes, yes, I know them well. Such a tragic family. You really must let me get you settled before we discuss any travel." She let him guide her into the hotel. She let him order her tea. The moment he turned his back to speak with the desk clerk, she walked through the dining room, through the kitchen, past two startled cooks, who said nothing because in this country, you did not stop a frightened young woman who was walking fast and out the back door into the alley. The alley smelled of horse and wood smoke and the iron bite of the storm coming. At the end of the alley was a small livery half open to the wind, and inside the livery was an old man brushing down a tired bay mare. The old man had a face like a piece of cottonwood that had been left out in too many seasons. White whiskers, a battered slouch hat, and a faded green coat that had once been a soldier's coat in a war. He was probably too young to have fought in, but had fought in anyway. She did not know his name. She would in 1 minute. "Excuse me, sir," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I need to hire a horse. I have very little money. I need to ride to a place called Copper Ridge tonight before the storm closes the passes. I am expected by the Calloway brothers." The old man stopped brushing the mare. He turned and looked at her slow the way a man turns to look at something he has not seen in many years and was not sure he would ever see again. Calloway, he said. His voice was the gravel under a creek bed. Yes, sir. Lass, you don't know me, but my name is Old Hank Brennan, and I knew the Calloway boys when their mother was still drawing breath. I helped Holt Calloway build the first chimney on his cabin up there before he ever met Annalise. I am the only man in this town who will tell you the truth about what is happening here, and I will tell you the truth because you have a face that reminds me of my own girl who is buried in a churchyard outside Cork, and because Hollis Blackwood has been watching the door of this hotel for an hour with one of his men. Della felt her knees try to give. She put her hand on the rail of the stall. He is not what he says he is, she whispered. Old Hank let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost oh some. No, lass, he is not. And neither was Ezra Marsh, who was a better man than 10 of him. Ezra Marsh kept a book. Hollis Blackwood has been hunting that book for 2 years. If you have anything in your possession that a man like that would want, you do not stay in this hotel 1 minute longer. Della looked at Old Hank. Old Hank looked at the small lump under the left side of her dress where the book was sewn against her ribs, and his eyes went wet for 1 second and then went hard. He saddled the bay mare himself. He took only the few coins she had. He pressed a hunk of jerked elk and a small flask of cold coffee into her saddlebag. Listen to me, he said. There are 2 trails out of Silver Creek that go up the ridge. One has a sign and one does not. You will take the one that does not. You will look for 2 pine trees that are bent toward each other like 2 old men praying. You will pass between them. You will keep climbing for 4 hours until you see smoke. The smoke will be Holt's chimney. You will not stop. You will not look behind you. The storm will catch you last, and the storm will try to take you, but you will keep climbing. And when Holt Calloway opens that door, you will tell him, Old Hank Brennan sent you. He will know my name. He will let you in. Della climbed onto the bay mare. She had ridden side saddle in a Boston park exactly twice in her life. She did not ride side saddle now. She hiked her navy skirt over the mare's back and rode astride like a farm girl. Old Hank stood in the open door of the livery and watched her go. And as she rode out into the first soft white of the storm, she heard him say one more thing, low almost to himself. I'm sorry, Annalise. She did not know who Annalise was. She would, in one day. The first hour was easy. The snow came down in big, lazy flakes that brushed her face like a mother's hand. The bay mare knew the trail. Della found the 2 pines that bent toward each other, and she rode between them, and she felt the trail begin to climb, and she thought, I am going to make it. I am going to be at his door before sundown. The second hour was harder. The snow came faster. The wind came up out of the canyons on both sides of the trail, and the wind was not lazy at all. By the 3rd hour, she could no longer see the bay mare's ears. By the 4th hour, the bay mare slipped on a patch of ice under the snow and went down on her right knee, and Della went over the mare's shoulder into a drift. And when she sat up, the mare was gone, scrambling back down the trail toward home, the way horses do when fear has finally beaten loyalty out of them. Della Whitfield stood up in the snow. Her trunk was on the back of that mare. Her food was on the back of that mare. Her flask of coffee was on the back of that mare. All she had was the dress on her body, her boots with a cameo at her throat, and the small leather book sewn against her ribs. She started walking. She did not know how far. She did not know in what direction. The sun, what was left of it, was a smear of gray light somewhere up and to her left, so she kept that smear up and to her left, and she walked. The cold went through her dress in the first 10 minutes. After that, the cold did not matter because she stopped feeling it. She fell the first time at what she guessed was the half-hour mark. She got up. She fell the second time and stayed down longer. She got up. She fell the 3rd time and could not feel her hands at all. The 4th time she fell, she did not get up. She turned her face up to the sky and let the snow come down on her open eyes. And she thought of her mother and of the kitchen in the house in Boston and of the way her mother had sung an old country song about the bonny banks while she stirred the fire, and Della whispered into the wind the only word she had left. "Mother, I tried." And then she heard the dog bark. It was a long way off at first, just one bark. Then it came again closer. Then a third time, and the third time she could hear the urgency in it, the way a dog barks when it has found the thing its master has been looking for, and it does not yet know whether the thing is alive or dead. She tried to lift her head. She could not. A light came through the snow swinging. Voices. Heavy steps that did not crunch the snow the way her boots had crunched the snow. These were the steps of men who knew this country. Then a face, the biggest face she had ever seen, bent down close to hers, the beard on it caked with snow, the eyes the color of mountain honey held to a candle. He did not say much. There was no time. He gathered her up in his arms the way a grown man gathers up a sleeping child, and she felt her cheek go against the wool of his coat, and she heard his voice rumble in his chest as he spoke to the dog. "He's got her cop. Let's get her home." She did not remember the trip back. She remembered much later only one small thing. She remembered somewhere in the dark behind her closed eyes that she had whispered something against his coat. She did not know what she had whispered. She was 9 years old in her mind. She was in her mother's kitchen. The fire had not started yet. The lamp had not broken yet. Her mother was singing. Mother, she had whispered into Holt Calloway's coat. "I've come home." Holt Calloway heard it. Holt Calloway did not understand it. He filed it away in the part of his mind where a man files the things he does not have time to think about yet. Inside the cabin, the fire was high. Wyatt had built it up the moment they heard Copper start to bark before any of them had even known what the dog had heard. Silas had the kettle on. The buffalo robe was already laid out on the long bench by the hearth. Holt laid her down on the buffalo robe. "Boys," he said, "we don't know who she is yet. We're going to find out. But first we are going to keep her alive. Silas, you read those medical books last winter. You tell us how to warm her." Wyatt Water. "Slow. Don't let me make a single move that's too fast." Silas knelt by the bench. His face was pale under the lamp. "Slow," he said. "Slow is the only way. Too fast and her heart will stop. We start at the hands and the feet. We do not put her near the fire. We wrap her in dry wool. We give her warm water by spoon, not hot. If she has a thread of life in her, we will find it." Wyatt set the kettle off the iron and dipped warm water into a tin cup. His hands, which could split firewood all day without trembling, were trembling now. Holt eased her wet coat off her shoulders. Even unconscious, she made a small sound, and Holt stopped, and he and Wyatt and Silas, all three, looked at the floor the way 3 honorable men look at the floor when a woman has been put under their care without her permission. The wet coat came free in his hands, and as it came free, something fell out of an inner pocket and hit the pine floorboards with a small, soft thump that none of them would forget. A small leather book, old, worn at the corners, tied with a strip of rawhide. Holt picked it up. He almost set it on the table without looking. Then his eye caught the writing on the inside of the front cover, and he stopped breathing for 1 full second. "Property of Ezra Marsh, Assayer, Silver Creek Mining Company." Holt knew that name. Annalise had spoken that name. Annalise had said the week before she died, "Ezra Marsh is a good man." "Holt, he's the only honest scale in that office, and it's costing him." Holt opened the book to the second page. He read 4 lines. He turned the page. He read 4 more. His face went the color of old wood ash. Silas looked up from his work over the girl on the bench. "Holt, what is it?" Holt did not answer. He turned to the page where Ezra Marsh had begun a list of names. He found a name he had been waiting 3 years to find without knowing he was waiting for it. Annalise Calloway, November 17th, 1880. Came to me, had figured it out, begged her not to confront H directly. She said she would tell her husband first. And under that, in a different ink, written later, written by a hand that had known what it was writing. November 23rd, 1880. Annalise Calloway dead. Child also dead. Officially red fever. I do not believe it. I will tell no one. They will come for me next. Holt Calloway sat down on the bench beside the unconscious girl in the navy dress. He sat down because his legs had stopped holding him up. The book hung open in his hands. Wyatt came across the room slow. Holt, brother, what does it say? Holt could not get the words out. He turned the book around in his big hands and held it up so Wyatt could read it himself. Wyatt read it. Wyatt read it again. Wyatt put one hand against the wall of the cabin to steady himself. Silas said in a voice gone very small, "What does it say?" Wyatt looked at his younger brother and could not make his mouth work. Holt found his voice. The voice came out flat and quiet and from very far down inside his chest. It says Annalise did not die of fever, Cy. It says she figured out what Hollis Blackwood was doing to the men in this valley, and she went to tell me and someone fed her something before she could. It says Lily ate it too. It says Ezra Marsh wrote it all down because he knew he was next. The cabin went quiet in a way that only a cabin in a mountain blizzard can go quiet. The wind outside was not quiet. The fire in the hearth was not quiet. But the three Calloway brothers were quiet the way three men go quiet when the floor under their lives gives way, and they understand for the first time that they have been standing on nothing for 3 winters. Copper, the old golden retriever, walked across the cabin floor and lay down at the foot of the bench where the girl in the navy dress was wrapped in the buffalo robe. He put his head on his paws. He did not take his eyes off her. Copper had not chosen a stranger like that since Annalise. In the morning, the storm was still on them. In the morning, Della Whitfield opened her eyes and saw a low pine ceiling she did not recognize and smelled wood smoke and coffee and the faint, clean smell of bear grease soap, and turned her head and saw a man so big he had to duck under the cabin door frame coming in from the porch with an armload of split pine for the fire. He saw she was awake. He set the wood down beside the hearth without making a sound. He came to her slow the way you come to a wild thing you do not want to scare, and he knelt down beside the bench so his eyes were level with hers and not above her. "You are on Copper Ridge," he said. "You are in my cabin. You came to the right door, Miss Whitfield. My name is Holt Calloway. The 2 men over there are my brothers. Wyatt is the one with the bad jokes. Silas is the one with the books. We will not hurt you. You are safe now. Nothing comes through that door I do not let through." Della tried to speak. Her voice was a thread. "You are my husband then." Holt let out a slow breath. He had been working on the answer to that question for an hour, sitting by the fire and watching her sleep. He had decided that the only honest answer was the whole answer, and the whole answer was going to cost him. "Miss Whitfield, I owe you a hard truth. I never wrote that advertisement. My brother Wyatt wrote it. He put my name on it. He sent it. He did it because he believed I was dying by inches up here on this ridge after I lost my wife and my little girl 3 years ago, and he could not stand to watch it anymore. He did it out of love for me, but he did it without my knowing. So I cannot stand here and ask you to marry a man who was not ready for you. I will not do that to you." Della closed her eyes. Then she opened them. "What do I do then?" "You stay. You stay in my cabin until the spring opens the passes. You take the bedroom. You will not be touched by any man under this roof. When the trail thaws, I will pay your way to wherever in this country you wish to go. Boston, Chicago, San Francisco. You decide. You owe me nothing for it. I'm only sorry the advertisement ever got sent." Della looked at him for a long time. She looked at the kindness in his face, which was not the smooth kindness of Hollis Blackwood. It was the rough kindness of a man who had paid for it. She looked at at her feet who had not moved in an hour. She looked at the 2 brothers at the table who were pretending to clean their guns and were not pretending well. Then she said the thing she had not planned to say. "Mr. Calloway, there is a small leather book sewn into the lining of my dress just under my left ribs. I need you to find it. I need you to open it. I need you to help me get it to a man in Helena named Marshall Thaddeus Pike. Do you know him?" Holt Calloway went still. The kind of still a deer goes when it has heard a branch break in the wrong direction. I read your book last night, Miss Whitfield. It fell out of your coat when we got you out of your wet things. We did not pry. It opened on its own, and then I could not stop reading. Della did not understand at first. Then she did. Mr. Calloway, whatever is in that book, tell me. Holt set his big hand flat on the table. His eyes did not leave hers. When he spoke, his voice was the voice of a man who had been carrying a stone for 3 years and had just found out the stone was alive. Miss Whitfield, the man you were running from in Silver Shriek, Hollis Blackwood, he is the man who killed my wife and my little girl. He fed them something 3 winters ago and put red fever on the death certificate, and the only man in this territory who knew about it was Ezra Marsh. And Ezra Marsh wrote it down in the book that you have been carrying against your ribs all the way from Boston. You did not come here by accident, Miss Whitfield. I do not know what to call what brought you here. But it was not an accident. For a long moment, Della did not move. The fire popped in the hearth. The wind pressed its shoulder against the cabin wall and gave up. Outside, somewhere beyond the snow, the rest of the world was going on without knowing that anything had changed. Then Della Whitfield, 22 years old, orphan of Boston virgin bride, of a man she had not yet married, did the thing that no one had ever taught her to do at the St. Catherine Academy for Young Women. She reached across the table and laid her small white hand on top of Holt Calloway's big scarred one. She did not flinch when she did it. He did not pull away. Then we will take him to that Marshall and Helena, she said. Together. For your wife. For your little girl. For Ezra Marsh. For Cordelia Marsh, who put this book in my hand in Boston and is probably already dead for it. For all of them. We will do this together. Holt Calloway looked down at the small white hand on top of his big scarred one. In 3 years, no woman had touched him on purpose. In 3 years, he had forgotten what it felt like to be reached for, instead of reached past. He did not move his hand. He did not move at all. Across the room, Wyatt Calloway, who had carried his own private stone for 5 years and had not yet told his older brother what was on it, set down the gun he had been pretending to clean. He looked at Silas. Silas looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. They did not need to. They had both just watched the first crack of light come through the wall of a house that had been dark for 3 winters. Outside the cabin, the storm bent the pines. Inside, the fire burned steady. Copper, the old golden retriever, lifted his head once looked at the girl in the navy dress whose hand was resting on his master's hand, decided that everything was in order, and lowered his head back onto his paws. This mountain, Holt Calloway thought, without quite knowing he was thinking it, this mountain does not lie. People do. But this girl had not lied. And the man down in the valley who had killed Annalise and Lily was about to find out that the storm he thought he had used to bury one more witness had instead delivered her alive into the only cabin in Montana Territory where her book could not be bought, could not be burned, and could not be stopped. The longest winter of Holt Calloway's life had 3 months left to run. It was about to become the winter that gave him his life back. The storm did not break for 8 more days. 8 days is a long time in a one-room cabin with 3 men, 1 woman, and 1 old golden retriever who had decided on the first morning that the woman was his now. 8 days is long enough for strangers to become something else. Long enough for silences to start meaning things. Long enough for a man who had not laughed in 3 winters to laugh once, and then catch himself, and then look at the floor embarrassed at the sound of his own voice. Della Whitfield healed slow, but she healed sure. The first day she could not stand. The second day she could sit at the table wrapped in the buffalo robe and take broth from a tin spoon. The third day she walked the 4 short steps from the bench to the hearth on her own, and Holt Calloway, who had been watching her from across the room, without seeming to let out a breath he had been holding for 2 days. By the 4th day, she was helping. That was how it began. Della Whitfield had been raised in a charity school, and a charity school does not teach a girl to sit when there is work to be done. She did not ask permission. She simply rose one morning, tied an old apron of Annalise's that Silas had quietly washed and laid out for her, and started kneading the bread dough Wyatt had given up on. Wyatt watched her work the dough on the pine board. He watched her small white hands push and fold and push and fold, the way her mother had taught her in a Boston kitchen that no longer existed. Miss Whitfield, he said, I have eaten Holt's bread for 3 years, and I have eaten Silas's bread for 3 years, and I have eaten my own bread for 3 years, and I want you to know with my hand on my heart that whatever you are about to make is going to be the best thing that has crossed this threshold since Annalise. Della smiled down at the dough so they would not see her face. She had not smiled at a man's words in a very long time. The bread came out of the iron oven 2 hours later, and it was in fact the best thing that had crossed that threshold since Annalise. Holt cut it with his hunting knife. Wyatt ate 3 slices and made a sound that was almost a confession of love. Silas ate his slice slow and set down his book and looked at Della the way a younger brother looks at a sister he has just realized he was missing his whole life. That was the 4th day. On the 5th day, the snow came down so thick they could not see the woodshed from the porch, and Holt had to rope himself to the doorpost the way sailors rope themselves to a mast in a hurricane, just to bring in the morning load of split pine. He came back inside white from boot to hat, and Della was waiting at the door with a wool blanket already open to receive him. She did not say anything. She simply wrapped the blanket around his shoulders and stood there a moment longer than she needed to, and Holt Calloway, who had not been wrapped in anything by anyone in 3 years, stood very still and let her. Copper, lying by the fire, thumped his tail twice on the floor and went back to sleep. These were the small things. The cabin was full of small things now. The way Wyatt taught her to clean a Winchester without putting an eye out, his big hands closing carefully over her smaller ones to show her the rhythm of the cloth. The way Silas pulled down a battered copy of the poems of Emily Dickinson from a high shelf where it had been hidden for 2 years and pressed it into Della's hands and said, "This was my mother's, and you are the first person in this cabin who will know what to do with it." The way Holt, who almost never spoke at supper, started looking up from his plate when she spoke and stopped looking back down quite as fast as before. But the small things were not the whole story, and Della knew it, and the brothers knew it, and the book on the shelf above the hearth knew it most of all. The book sat there wrapped in a clean square of oilcloth, exactly where Holt had placed it on the second morning. None of them touched it during the daylight hours. The daylight hours belonged to bread and firewood and survival and the slow earning of trust. The book belonged to the night. On the 6th night after Della had gone to bed in the small back room that had been Holt's and was now hers, the 3 Calloway brothers and the book sat down at the table together for the first time. Holt unwrapped the oilcloth. He laid the book flat. He opened it to the first page. Wyatt poured 3 cups of coffee, the way men pour coffee when they know they are going to need their hands to do something other than shake. Silas, who had the best eyes and the steadiest reading voice, took the book and began at the beginning. Property of Ezra Marsh, assayer, Silver Creek Mining Company. Begun the 12th day of March, 1878. I am writing this because I am a coward. I should have walked into the United States Marshal's office in Helena 6 months ago and said what I am about to write down here. I did not. I told myself I needed proof. I told myself I had a wife in Cordelia and a brother in Boston and people who depended on me. I told myself 100 things. The truth is, I was afraid of Hollis Blackwood, and I am still afraid of him, and that is why I am writing in a book instead of in front of a judge. Ezra Marsh had been afraid for a long time. Ezra Marsh had been afraid in March of 1878, and he had still been afraid in November of 1880, and somewhere in between those 2 dates, he had stopped being only a frightened bookkeeper and become the most dangerous man in Silver Creek without ever lifting his voice. Silas read on. The numbers, the names, the men whose claims had been quietly shaved by the assay office year after year until the difference between what they had pulled from the ground and what they had been paid for was the size of a small fortune. Henry Bowman, 1879. Found dead in the back of his own claim with a pistol in his hand and no powder burns on his temple. Tom Henley, 1880, fell down a shaft on a Sunday afternoon when no one was working the mine. His widow lost the house in a week. The money trail back to Hollis Blackwood was thin in any one place, and you would never have caught it in any one place. But Ezra Marsh had caught it in 27 places and 27 thin trails braided together into one rope thick enough to hang a man. Silas turned the page. He stopped reading. Wyatt said, "What?" Silas said, his voice gone strange. "It is Annalise." The next entry is Annalise. Holt did not move. He had read this page already on the first night alone with his hands shaking. He had not read it aloud to his brothers. He had been waiting without quite knowing he was waiting for this moment when all three of them sat at the same table and heard it together. Some weights you cannot carry alone. Some weights are not yours to carry alone. Read it, Si. Silas read. November 17th, 1880. Annalise Calloway came to me at the assay office today. She had figured it out. I do not know how. She was a careful woman and she watched her husband's friends and she listened. She had brought me a list of 3 men whose claim payments did not match what their husbands had told them at supper. She wanted me to tell her if the numbers were wrong on my side. I told her the numbers were wrong on my side. I told her I had been writing them down. I begged her not to confront Hollis Blackwood directly. I told her she had a child. I told her the men in this town who tried to confront Hollis Blackwood had a way of dying in accidents. She said she would tell her husband first. She said her husband was a quiet man, but he was the kind of quiet man who did not let things go once he understood them. She said she would feed him supper tonight and tell him at the table after the little one was in bed. I walked her to the door of the office. I watched her cross the street. I watched her turn the corner toward home. I have not seen her since. I'm writing this on the morning of the 18th, and I am sick to my stomach with the wrongness of it. Silas turned the page. His hand was shaking. November 23rd, 1880. Annalise Calloway dead. Lily Calloway dead. Officially red fever. The doctor was Hollis Blackwood's man. I do not believe one word of the certificate. I believe she got home that night and she fed her family the supper she had been planning, but I believe somewhere between the assay office and her own kitchen on a town street where Hollis Blackwood owns half the doors, something was put into her hand that was not what she thought it was. A girl, a loaf, a kindness from a neighbor she trusted. I will never know which. I only know that the woman who walked out of my office on November 17th with a list in her hand was buried with her 4-year-old daughter on November 24th, and Hollis Blackwood sent flowers to the grave. I could not go to the funeral. I told Cordelia I was sick. I was sick. I am still sick. I am writing this in case something happens to me, because something is going to happen to me. And someone needs to know that Annalise Calloway and her child were murdered for the contents of a list she carried in her apron pocket on a Wednesday afternoon. Silas closed the book. The 3 Calloway brothers sat at the table in the cabin on Copper Ridge and did not speak for a long time. The fire popped. The wind pressed its shoulder against the cabin wall. Holt Calloway put his face in his hands. He did not weep. Holt Calloway had wept once in 3 years, and that was on the night Annalise and Lily were lowered into the same pine box together, because the box maker could not get a small one finished in time. And after that night, Holt had decided that weeping was a thing for men who still believed in mercy. He had stopped believing in mercy on November 24th, 1880. So he did not weep now. He simply put his face in his hands and let the worst 3 years of his life rearrange themselves in his head into the new shape they had to take. Now the true shape, the shape with a man's name written under it. Wyatt got up from the table. Wyatt went to the wall by the door where his old gun belt hung from a peg. The gun belt had not been worn since they had come up the mountain in the spring of 1881. He took it down. He buckled it around his waist without saying a word. He sat back down at the table and put both hands flat on the wood and looked at his older brother. "Brother," he said, "I have to tell you something now. I should have told you 5 years ago. I am telling you now because if I do not tell you now, I will not be able to ride down off this mountain with you when the time comes, and the time is coming. Holt lifted his face out of his hands. Wyatt told him. Wyatt told him about Helena 5 years ago, when Wyatt had been a deputy United States Marshal under a man named Halloran. Wyatt told him about the first complaint that had come in against Hollis Blackwood from a miner in Silver Creek, and about the second and the third. Wyatt told him about how he had ridden out to Silver Creek personally in plain clothes in the spring of 1879, and how he had spent 2 weeks watching the assay office and watching Hollis Blackwood and putting together a case in his head that he had been ready to bring back to Helena. Wyatt told him about coming back to Helena and laying his case on Halloran's desk and watching Halloran's face go very still in a way that at the time Wyatt had not understood. Wyatt told him about the next morning when Halloran had called him into the office and told him there had been a complaint against him from a woman in a Helena boarding house, a woman Wyatt had never met who had signed a paper saying things about him that were not true and could not be unsaid. Wyatt told him about the choice Halloran had given him: resign quietly with no charges and the woman's complaint disappears, or fight it and the complaint goes to the territorial newspapers and the Callaway name goes with it. I resigned, Wyatt said. I resigned because I was 25 years old and I was scared, and I did not understand yet that Halloran had been bought. I rode home to Silver Creek with my tail between my legs, and I told you I had quit because the work did not suit me. That was the lie I told you, brother. That was the lie I have been telling you for 5 years. I quit because Hollis Blackwood reached up the chain in Helena and pulled me down, and I was too young and too scared to know what was being done to me until it was already done. Wyatt's voice cracked here. He did not let it stop him. A year and a half later, Annalise figured out what I had not been able to prove. A year and a half later, Annalise walked across a town street in Silver Creek with a list in her apron pocket, and a man who already knew about that list because his man, Halloran, had read my report, killed her for it. Killed her and Lily, my niece, 4 years old. Brother, I have carried this for 5 years. I have carried it up this mountain and through 3 winters and into every cup of coffee I have poured for you in this cabin. I sent that advertisement to Boston because I could not watch you die 1 more inch on my account. I told myself I was doing it for you. I was doing it for me. I was doing it because if I could put one good thing into your life, I might be able to look at myself in the shaving mirror one morning and not see the man who let his sister-in-law die. Wyatt stopped. He did not look at Holt. He looked at the table. Holt Callaway stood up from the table. He walked around to his brother's side of the table. Wyatt did not lift his face. Holt put one big hand on the back of Wyatt's neck, the way their father had done when they were boys, and one of them had broken something he should not have broken. He held it there for a long moment. Then Holt Callaway, who had not embraced another grown man in 3 years, pulled his middle brother up out of the chair and into a hug that broke something in both of them at the same time. You should have told me why. I know, brother. You should have told me 5 years ago. I know. We would have gone after him together. The 3 of us. We would have ridden down off this mountain in the spring of 1881, and we would have put him in the ground. I know that too. Holt held him a moment longer. Then he let him go and he stepped back and he looked at his middle brother for the first time in 5 years without any wall between them. You are not the man who let her die. Why? Hollis Blackwood is the man who killed her. We are not going to spend 1 more night in this cabin pretending otherwise. We are not going to spend 1 more winter on this ridge waiting for the world to come to us. The world is going to come to us, and soon. And when it comes, all 3 of us are going to be standing at that door together the way we should have been standing 5 years ago. Silas, who had not spoken in a long time, stood up from his side of the table and walked to the wall by the door where his own gun belt hung from a second peg. He took it down. He buckled it on. He came back to the table and sat down in the 3rd chair. 3 Callaway brothers, 3 gun belts, 1 book. 1 sleeping girl in the back room who had carried that book against her ribs across 2,000 miles of country and did not yet know that she had just stitched a family back together in the course of one night. The seventh morning, the storm finally began to thin. By midday, the sky over Copper Ridge was a bruised blue, and the wind had dropped enough that a man could stand on the porch without losing his hat. By the early afternoon, Copper, who had been restless since dawn, walked stiff-legged to the cabin door and let out one long, low growl from the bottom of his throat that none of them had heard him make in 3 years. Holt looked up from the leather strap he was mending. "Cop, what is it?" Copper growled again. The growl was the growl a dog makes when he is telling his master that the thing he has been waiting for has finally come up the trail. Holt set the leather strap down. He stood up. He took the Winchester down from the pegs over the door without hurry, the way a man takes down a tool he has been expecting to need. Wyatt was already at the side window. "Riders," Wyatt said. "5 of them, one sleigh, coming up the lower switchback." Silas was at the other window. The man in the sleigh is wearing a black coat and a tall hat. He is sitting like a man who has never had to be afraid of anything in his life. Holt stepped out onto the porch. The cold air bit into his lungs. Behind him in the doorway, Della Whitfield appeared with the buffalo robe still around her shoulders, her honey hair loose, her eyes very blue and very awake. Holt did not turn around. He spoke without looking at her. "Miss Whitfield, stay inside behind the door. Whatever happens out here, do not come out unless I call you out by your name." She did not argue. She stepped back into the cabin. Wyatt moved up to her shoulder, his Colt low and easy in his hand. Silas took the rear window with his rifle. Copper stood in the open doorway with his hackles up, a low rumble running steady in his chest like the sound of a millstone turning. The sleigh came up the last switchback and stopped 20 feet from the porch. Hollis Blackwood stepped down from the sleigh. He did not hurry. He took his time settling his tall hat on his head and adjusting his gloves and looking around at the Callaway cabin the way a man looks at a piece of property he has already decided to buy. 4 men got down from the saddle horses behind him. Each of the 4 had a rifle across his arm. None of them pointed the rifles. They did not need to. Hollis Blackwood smiled up at Holt Callaway on the porch. "Holt, it has been a long time. I came up as soon as the trail would bear a sleigh. I heard a young woman from back east got separated from her party in the storm last week. The whole town has been worried sick. I thought I would come up myself and see if she had found her way to the only habitation between Silver Creek and the Divide." Holt did not answer. The Winchester rested across his forearm the way a man rests a thing he is not yet pointing. Hollis Blackwood's smile did not waver. "I understand the young lady was carrying some personal effects. A small leather book, among other things. A friend of hers in Boston, Mrs. Cordelia Marsh, asked me, as a favor, to make sure the book was returned to its rightful owner. Mrs. Marsh was, I am sorry to say, taken ill very suddenly last month. She did not survive. So you see, the book has no rightful owner left in Boston. I came to take it home." Inside the cabin, behind the door, Della Whitfield closed her eyes for one long moment when she heard that Cordelia Marsh was dead. She had known. She had known the moment Cordelia had pressed the book into her hands at the iron gate of the academy. But knowing is one thing and hearing is another, and a small piece of Della's heart broke off and went with that woman she had only met for 90 seconds on a November night in Boston. Then Della Whitfield opened her eyes and she made a decision. She stepped out from behind the door. She walked the 4 short steps across the porch and she stopped beside Holt Callaway and she put her small white hand on his forearm just below the Winchester and she looked down at Hollis Blackwood from the height of the cabin porch with her chin up and her shoulders back and her blue eyes very calm. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "I do not have any leather book." Hollis Blackwood's smile changed. It got a little tighter at the corners. "Miss Whitfield, I am relieved to see you alive. I worried about you all week." "I am sure you did, Mr. Blackwood. I am sure you worried about me very much the way you worried about Mrs. Cordelia Marsh in Boston, and the way you worried about her husband's brother, Mr. Ezra Marsh, the assayer in your mining office. And the way you worried about Mrs. Annalise Calloway and her 4-year-old daughter Lily on the night of November 23rd, 1880. Holt Calloway, on the porch beside her, did not move. But Holt Calloway's hand on the Winchester closed one notch tighter, and the white came up on the knuckles. Hollis Blackwood's face did something then that he had not let it do in 20 years of careful living. It went for one full second into the face that lived underneath the face. It was not a kind face. It was not a polished face. It was the face of a man who had drowned other men in the dark for the price of a heavy purse and had slept fine afterward. Then the polished face came back. "Young woman," he said, "you have been listening to mountain gossip. The Calloway family has had a sad history and has, I am afraid, looked for someone to blame for it for a long time, though. I do not begrudge them their grief. I understand it. But I am not going to stand here into the snow and be slandered by a girl who was a stranger in this country a week ago." Wyatt Calloway stepped out of the cabin doorway and into the light beside his older brother. His Colt was in his right hand, hanging by his thigh, easy and not pointed. "Hollis," he said, "do you remember me?" Hollis Blackwood looked at Wyatt for the first time since he had stepped down from the sleigh. He had not until that moment paid any attention to the second man on the porch. He paid attention now. His eyes narrowed. "Wyatt Calloway," he said slowly, "I had heard you came home from Helena. I came home from Helena Hollis. I came home from Helena because a man named Halloran put a paid woman's name on a complaint against me to make me drop a case I had built against you. I never dropped a case, Hollis. I just went up a mountain in Damaman and waited. I waited 5 years. And do you know what came up that mountain to me last week through the worst storm in 20 winters?" Wyatt did not finish the sentence. Della Whitfield did not need him to. Behind Hollis Blackwood, the 4 men with the rifles shifted in their saddles. They had not signed on for whatever this was turning into. They had signed on to ride up a mountain and bring a girl and a book back down. The girl was on the porch and the book was in the cabin, and the men of the cabin had 2 guns visible and a third one almost certainly aimed at them through the rear window, and the 4 hired men had begun in the way hired men begin to do the small math of their own survival. Hollis Blackwood saw it in their faces. He had been buying men for 30 years. He knew the moment a bought man starts to wonder if the price was worth it. He raised his gloved hand slow. "Calloways," he said, "there has been a misunderstanding. Let us be reasonable men. The young lady is alive and well. That is the important thing. I will return to Silver Creek, and we will let the spring trail settle this between gentlemen." Holt Calloway spoke for the first time since Hollis Blackwood had stepped down from the sleigh. "Hollis, there are no gentlemen on this porch. There is only me and my brothers and the woman you came up here to take. And we are all 4 of us going to be in Silver Creek before this week is out with a federal marshal named Thaddeus Pike and with a book that has your name in it on every other page. You are not going to ride away from this. You are going to ride back down this mountain today, and you are going to spend the next 4 days waiting for us. And when we come, we are going to come in front of every miner in your valley. And those miners are going to hear what you did to their friends and to their fathers and to my wife and to my little girl. And then, Hollis, you are going to find out what frontier justice looks like when it has been waiting 5 years for an appointment." Hollis Blackwood looked at Holt Calloway. He looked at Wyatt Calloway. He looked at the rifle barrel that was just visible in the rear window where Silas was. He looked at Della Whitfield, 22 years old, in a navy dress, with snow still in her hair, standing on the porch, with her hand on a mountain man's arm. He climbed back into his sleigh. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. The silence said it. His sleigh turned in the snow. His 4 hired men turned their horses behind him. The little procession started back down the lower switchback, smaller and smaller, against the white until it disappeared between the trees. The Calloways stood on the porch and watched until they could not see them anymore. Then Holt Calloway turned to the woman beside him. He looked down at her. She was so much smaller than he was. The top of her head came barely to his chest. Her cheeks were pink with cold and with something else. "You should not have come out," he said. His voice was low. "Come on." "I know," she said. I told you to stay inside, I know. Why did you come out, Della? It was the first time he had used her given name. Not Miss Whitfield. Della, the way her mother had said it. Della looked up at him. The wind moved a strand of her honey hair across her cheek. She did not push it away, because she said you have been standing alone on this porch for 3 winters. Mr. Calloway, and I decided I was not going to let you stand alone on it for one more. Holt Calloway did not have an answer for that. He had nothing in him that would answer that. He simply looked down at her, and the look went on long enough that Wyatt behind them cleared his throat very quietly and said, I think I'll go check on Copper, and stepped back inside the cabin and shut the door. The next 4 days were the 4 days that taught Holt Calloway the difference between living through a winter and living a life inside one. Hollis Blackwood did not come back himself. Hollis Blackwood was a careful man, and a careful man does not waste his own boots when he can waste other men's boots. Hollis Blackwood sent the storm to do his work for him in pieces. On the second night, the woodshed at the back of the cabin caught fire from a thrown lantern that no one had heard come over the snow. Wyatt smelled the smoke first and was out the door in his stocking feet with a bucket of melted snow water before the fire had taken more than a third of the wood. They saved half the winter's pine. They did not save the other half. None of them slept the rest of that night. On the third morning, Silas walked a quarter-mile to the spring branch to fill the water buckets and found a young mule deer dead at the edge of the water with its tongue out and its eyes filmed over. Silas had read enough of his medical books to know what rat poison looks like in an animal that has drunk it. They did not use the spring branch again. They walked 4 miles after that to a higher seep at the foot of a granite shelf, and they hauled the water back in 2 trips a day, and the hauling cost them an hour of light each morning that they could not afford to lose. On the 4th morning, Holt found the bay mare. The bay mare was the one Della had ridden up the mountain on, the one that had thrown her in the snow and run home to the Silver Creek livery on her own. Old Hank Brennan had stabled her there until the trails opened and he could send her back up. Someone had ridden her back up early. Someone had ridden her up to the edge of the Calloway hayfield in the dark and had put a single arrow through her throat and had left her for Holt to find at sunrise. The arrow was a message. The arrow said, your friend in Silver Creek did not want to tell us where you were. Your friend in Silver Creek does not breathe anymore. We took his horse for the trip up. We thought you might want her back. Holt knelt in the bloodied snow beside the dead mare for a long time. Old Hank Brennan had built the first chimney on the Calloway cabin with his own 2 Irish hands many years ago. Old Hank Brennan had stood up at Holt and Annalise's wedding when Holt's own father was already in the ground. Old Hank Brennan had sent Della Whitfield up this mountain in a storm because old Hank Brennan had known what would happen to her if she stayed in Silver Creek 1 more hour. Old Hank Brennan was dead now, murdered in his own livery for the sin of pointing a frightened girl toward the only door in Montana territory where she would be safe. Holt Calloway closed the bay mare's eyes with his bare hand. He stood up out of the snow. He walked back to the cabin. He did not tell Della yet. He told Wyatt and Silas low in the corner by the hearth, and Wyatt's jaw locked, and Silas turned his face to the wall, and the 3 brothers stood there together and added one more name to the list of people Hollis Blackwood was going to answer for. That night on the porch, Della came out with 2 tin cups of coffee and sat down beside Holt without asking permission. The sky over Copper Ridge was the color of a deep bruise turning to night, and the first cold stars were coming out. Holt was on watch. He had been on watch every night for 4 nights running. She handed him a cup. She did not speak. He took it. He did not speak either. They sat that way for a long time side by side on the porch step, and Della's small shoulder was just barely touching Holt's big arm, and neither of them moved away. Copper lay across both their boots and snored. After a long time, Holt said very quietly into the dark, when this is done, when we have ridden down off this mountain, and we have done what we have to do in Silver Creek, and we have come back, there is a question I am going to need to ask you, Della. Della did not turn her head. She kept looking out at the stars over Montana. Mr. Calloway, she said, I have already answered it. Holt Calloway looked down at the small woman beside him on the porch step in the cold. The wind moved a strand of her honey hair. She did not push it away. Neither did he. He thought this mountain does not lie. He thought people do. And then he thought, but this one does not. And the longest winter of his life finally began to end. The fifth night was the night the arrow came through the window. Della Whitfield was sitting at the long pine table with Silas mending a tear in the elbow of Holt Calloway's wool work shirt by the light of a single tallow candle. Wyatt was on the porch on watch. Holt was in the back of the cabin, oiling the action of the Winchester for the third time that day, the way a man cleans a tool he is about to ask everything of. Copper, the old golden retriever, was asleep on the buffalo robe in front of the hearth, one ear twitching in a dream. Then Copper was not asleep anymore. Copper came up off the buffalo robe in one motion, and the sound that came out of him was not a bark. It was the long, low warning sound that a dog makes when the thing he has feared his whole life has finally walked up to the door. His hackles went up in a ridge from his neck to his tail. Della looked up from the shirt. The arrow came through the side window an instant later. It came through the oiled paper that they had stretched over the broken pane after the storm, and it made almost no sound at all in the coming. Only a soft tearing whisper, the way silk tears, and then a heavier sound when it hit. It hit Copper. The arrow took him high in the right shoulder, just behind the joint, and the old golden retriever made one small surprise sound like a child who has been struck by a thing he did not see coming, and his front legs went out from under him, and he went down on the pine floor in a slow, soft fold. Della was on the floor beside him before the candle on the table had finished guttering in the draft from the window. Holt came out of the back room with the Winchester already up his face, the face of a man who had been waiting 5 years for the next bad thing and had finally been given the appointment. Wyatt came in from the porch low, his Colt out, his eyes already on the window the arrow had come through. Silas was at the front door with his rifle scanning the dark line of the trees beyond the cabin yard. There was no second arrow. There was no third. There was, after a long-held breath, only the wind in the pines and the small, wet sound of Della Whitfield bent over Copper on the floor, whispering to him the way a woman whispers to a child who has been hurt and does not yet understand what hurt is. Hold still, Cop. Hold still, sweet boy. Do not move. Do not move. Holt knelt down on the other side of the dog. He laid his big hand flat on the Golden's flank. The flank was rising and falling fast and shallow, the way a hurt animal's flank rises and falls. The arrow was a hunting arrow fletched in dark feathers, the kind a man carries when he wants to put a thing down without making any noise. It had gone in clean, and it was still in. Silas was already moving for the medical box on the high shelf, where he kept the things he had read about in the books. He brought it down. He brought clean cloths. He brought the small bottle of grain alcohol. He brought the pair of long-handled forceps he had ordered through the mail one summer in St. Louis, when he had not yet understood that he was going to need them on a mountain. Tied to the shaft of the arrow, just above the fletching, was a square of folded paper. Holt did not want to read it. He read it anyway. He read it once, and then he read it again, and then he handed it to Wyatt without a word. Wyatt read it. Wyatt's mouth went into a thin, hard line. By sundown tomorrow, the note said, bring the girl in the book to the square in front of the Silver Creek Hotel. If you do not come, we will burn this mountain off the map, and we will stand at the bottom of it and shoot down whatever runs out of the trees. The choice is yours, Calloway. We have been patient. We are done being patient. Della did not look up from the dog. She had not yet seen the note. Her small white hands were already at work on Copper's shoulder, holding the wound steady so Silas could see it. Holt looked at his brothers across the body of the old dog, who had been the only living thing in this cabin for 3 winters, before Della Whitfield came up the mountain in a navy dress. We do not wait for sundown tomorrow, Holt said. We do not wait for them to come up. We go down before first light. We go down and we get there ahead of them, and we put an end to this on a town square in front of every miner Hollis Blackwood ever cheated. We do this in daylight in front of witnesses with the law on our side. We do not give him the night. Wyatt nodded once. Silas working the forceps now into the wound in Copper's shoulder. His hands as steady as a surgeon's hands said, only the dog will live if we get the arrow out clean, and we will get the arrow out clean. Della finally looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her face was not afraid. I am going with you tomorrow, she said. Holt opened his mouth to say no. She did not let him. I am going with you tomorrow, Mr. Calloway. I am the one who carried the book up this mountain. I am the one whose name is on the letter Hollis Blackwood used to find this cabin. I am the witness. Without me at that town square, the book is just a book. With me at that town square, the book is testimony. You know I am right. Do not waste your breath telling me I am wrong. Holt Calloway looked at the small woman across the body of the dog. He looked at her for a long time. Then he closed his mouth and he gave her one slow nod. And that was the last argument either of them would ever have about whether Della Whitfield got to stand where she meant to stand. The night before they rode down off Copper Ridge was the night Holt Calloway gave Della Whitfield the answer to a question she had asked him on the porch with 2 tin cups of coffee and a sky full of cold stars. Wyatt and Silas had gone to bed early, or had pretended to the way 2 younger brothers pretend to sleep when they know that the older brother needs the room. Copper was alive on the buffalo robe by the fire, his shoulder bandaged tight, his eyes half open, watching them from the floor, with the patience of a dog who has decided that whatever happens next is going to happen with him in the room. Della sat by the hearth in the chair that had once been Annalise's. Holt sat across from her in his own chair. Between them was the small pine table with 1 tallow candle on it, and the candle was the only light in the cabin, and the light was the color of warm honey on her face and on his hands. She reached up to her throat and unpinned the cameo brooch that had been her mother's. She held it out to him on the flat of her palm. Holt, she said, I want you to have this. If something happens tomorrow, I want it to be in your hand. My mother wore it the day she died. She told me the week before the fire that it was the symbol of a promise. She said no matter what happens, love stays. She said it the way a woman says a thing she wants you to remember after she is gone. I have remembered it for 13 years. Tonight I want to give it to you. Holt did not take the brooch. He closed her fingers around it gentle and pressed her hand back against her own chest. You will keep it, Della. You will keep it because nothing is going to happen to you tomorrow. I did not save Annalise. I did not save Lily. I have lived 3 years with that. I am not going to live one day with the other. Do you hear me? Listen to me, Della Whitfield. Nothing comes through that town square tomorrow that does not come through me first. Nothing. That is the promise I am giving you tonight in this cabin in front of God and my brothers and that dog on the floor. A Calloway keeps his word, even if it kills him. Della looked at him in the candlelight. The honey light caught the dark gold of his eyes and made them softer than they had been in 3 winters. Holt, she said, there is something I have wanted to tell you since the morning I woke up in this cabin. Tell me. When I left Boston, I thought I was going to a stranger. I thought I was going to a man whose name I did not know and whose face I had not seen, and I had made my peace with it because I did not have a better choice. I had decided I would be a good wife to him because there was nothing else for me to be. That was what I thought my life was going to be. I thought it was going to be a thing I survived. She paused. The candle popped softly between them. And then on the first night when I was half dead in your arms in the snow, you said the words, get into my cabin, it's freezing outside. And Holt, I do not know how to make you understand this. I had not heard a kind voice from a man in 13 years. Not since my father before the fire. I had not been carried. I had not been wrapped in a blanket. I had not been spoken to by a man who was not asking me for something I did not want to give. And in that moment in your arms, with the wind taking the last of me, I whispered something into your coat. I do not even remember whispering it, but I have remembered it every night since I woke up here. I whispered, Mother, I have come home. I was 9 years old in my own head, and I thought I was dying, And what I said was that I had come home. Della stopped. Her eyes were full, but the tears did not fall. I did not come to Montana, Holt. I came home. I just did not know that the home I was coming to had your name on the door. Holt Calloway sat very still in the chair across from her, with his big scarred hands open on his knees, and his face the face of a man who has just been given a thing he has not believed in for 3 years. He did not trust himself to speak for a long moment. When he did speak, his voice was lower than she had ever heard it. Della, I am not a young man anymore. I am not a smooth talker. I never was. I am 33 years old, and I have buried a wife and a child, and I have lived almost 3 years in a cabin on a mountain because I did not believe there was anything left in the world worth coming down for. I had decided that the rest of my life was going to be a long, quiet thing. I waited out until I could lie down in the ground next to them. That was the plan. That was the only plan I had. He reached across the small pine table. His big hand covered both of her small ones. And then a girl in a navy dress walked through my door in a blizzard with a book against her ribs, and the snow in her hair, and the dog who had not chosen anyone in 3 winters lay down at her feet. And I have spent every day since then learning by inches that my plan was wrong. The rest of my life is not going to be a long, quiet thing I wait out. The rest of my life is going to be whatever it is when you are sitting in the chair across from me. That is what the rest of my life is going to be. If you will have me, if you will have a man who has nothing left to give you except the 4 walls of this cabin and a name that is mostly scar tissue and a promise that he will not waste a single day of whatever years he has left. Della Whitfield did not say anything. She got up from her chair. She walked the 2 steps around the small pine table. She bent down and she kissed Holt Calloway, once soft on the mouth. It was the first kiss he had given or received in 3 years. It was the first kiss she had given or received in her whole life. It was the kind of kiss that does not need to be long because it does not need to prove anything. It tasted of coffee and pine smoke and the salt of one tear that had finally fallen. His beard was rough against her cheek. His hand came up slow and rested against the back of her head the way a man rests his hand against a thing he has been afraid to touch. When she straightened up, she did not move away from him. She stood beside his chair with her hand on his shoulder, and he leaned his temple against her side, and they stayed that way for a long, quiet moment, with the candle burning between them and the dog watching from the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was very soft. "Tomorrow we ride. Tomorrow we ride," he said. They left Copper Ridge an hour before first light. The sky was the color of cold iron, and the snow on the lower trail had crusted hard enough in the night to bear the horses without breaking. Holt led on his big black gelding. Wyatt rode on his right, the gun belt that had not been worn in 5 years now buckled around his waist again. Silas rode on the left, with Della behind him on a second horse, her arms wrapped around his ribs and her cheek against the back of his coat. Della was the worst rider of the 4 of them, and Silas was the steadiest seat, and there had been no argument about it. Marshal Thaddeus Pike rode at the head of the little column. Pike had come up the mountain 4 nights ago and made his presence known to Silas at a meeting on a high ridge that none of them had expected. Pike had been in the country a month, watching waiting, keeping his federal badge in his coat pocket where Hollis Blackwood's paid eyes could not see it. Pike was 55 years old, white in the temples, slow in the saddle, but never slow in the hand, and he had been waiting for an excuse to ride into Silver Creek with a federal warrant for 2 years. Della Whitfield had brought him the excuse in the lining of her dress. Copper, they left in the cabin with a wool blanket and a bowl of water, and a promise from Silas whispered into the old golden ear that they would all 4 come back up the trail by nightfall. The ride down took most of the morning. The sun came up red over the eastern peaks and turned the snow on the lower switchbacks the color of a rose, and Della watched the country open up below her in a long white roll toward the valley where Silver Creek sat under a thin blue ribbon of wood smoke. They came out of the trees at the upper end of the town a little before noon. Silver Creek was not ready for them. Silver Creek was ready for a sundown delivery of one frightened girl and one stolen book brought to the hotel square by three bargained mountain men who had finally been broken by a long siege. Silver Creek was not ready for four armed riders and a federal marshal coming in at noon up the main street with the sun on their faces and no surrender in their saddles. The first man who saw them was a stable boy in front of the livery where old Hank Brennan had once stood. The stable boy stopped sweeping and stared. Then he dropped the broom and he ran down the boardwalk toward the Silver Creek Hotel, and by the time the four horses and the marshal were at the head of the main street, the doors were starting to open. Hollis Blackwood's sheriff stepped out of the jail with a paper in his hand and four men behind him. "Hold up there, Calloway," the sheriff called. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest. Kidnapping a woman for immoral purposes. The young lady will dismount and come with me. You and your brothers will lay down your weapons in the street." Wyatt Calloway, who had been a deputy United States Marshal for 2 years before Hollis Blackwood pulled him down through the chain in Helena, knew a forged federal warrant when he saw one at 20 paces. He did not draw his Colt. He simply lifted his voice so the whole street could hear it. "Marshal Pike," he called, "would you do me the favor of showing this man your badge?" Marshal Thaddeus Pike rode 3 steps forward, very slow, very calm, and reached into his coat and brought out the heavy brass star of the United States Marshal Service for the District of Montana Territory. He did not lift it high. He did not need to. The brass caught the noon sun and threw it back at the sheriff, and the sheriff went a shade of gray that no paint could match. Sheriff Pike said, "That paper in your hand is not a federal warrant. I have the only federal warrant in this town today, and it has the name Hollis Blackwood written on it. I am going to need you to step aside, and I am going to need you to do it now, or I am going to add the obstruction of a federal officer to the very long list of crimes I am about to read out loud on the steps of that hotel. Do you understand me, son?" The sheriff stepped aside. He stepped aside fast. Up and down the main street of Silver Creek, doors were opening. Miners in canvas coats, storekeepers, 2 women in shawls, the stable boy, the blacksmith with his apron still on, a drunk who had been sleeping it off on the porch of the Lone Star Saloon and was now sitting up, rubbing his eyes and trying to understand what kind of dream he was in. By the time the 4 riders and the marshal reached the Silver Creek Hotel, there were already 40 people in the square. Hollis Blackwood stepped out of the front door of his hotel. He had been waiting for sundown. He had not been waiting for noon. He had not been waiting for a federal star. He had not been waiting for a girl in a navy dress to ride into his town on the back of a Callaway horse with her chin up and her eyes very calm. The face he came out wearing was not the smooth, pleasant face he had worn the first time Della had met him. The face he came out wearing was the face that lived underneath the face, and now that face was on the front of his head where everyone could see it. There were 6 of his hired men behind him on the hotel porch. There were 2 more on the roof of the assay office across the square. Della saw them. So did Wyatt. So did Marshal Pike, who lifted one finger from the reins of his horse and made a small, slow circle in the air, and 3 men whom none of the Callaways had seen until that moment stepped out from inside 3 different doorways on the main street. 3 more federal deputies. 3 more brass stars. Pike had not come into Silver Creek alone. Pike had come into Silver Creek with the law. Della Whitfield slipped down off the back of Silas's horse. She walked through the snow of the square to the steps of the Silver Creek Hotel. Holt walked beside her on her right. Wyatt walked on her left. Silas walked behind her with the book of Ezra Marsh held in both hands like a thing being carried to an altar. Della stopped at the foot of the hotel steps. She looked up at Hollis Blackwood. The whole town was watching her. She did not know that this was the moment she had been walking toward since the night a woman in a black dress had pressed a leather book into her hand at an iron gate in Boston. She did not need to know it. Her body knew it. Her voice knew it. "My name is Adelaide Whitfield," she said, and her voice carried in the cold air the way a bell carries. "I came out from Boston 6 weeks ago to be married. I came out here on a stagecoach paid for by a family I had never met, with everything I owned in one small trunk and with one thing more that a stranger pressed into my hand the night before I left. That stranger was Mrs. Cordelia Marsh of Boston. Her husband's brother was Mr. Ezra Marsh, the assayer who used to work in the office of this man here, Hollis Blackwood. Mr. Ezra Marsh kept a book for 6 years. Mr. Ezra Marsh wrote down in that book every false weight and every shaved claim, and every miner who came in with 14 ounces of gold in his hand and walked out paid for 7. Mr. Ezra Marsh also wrote down what happened to the men who figured it out. Mr. Henry Bowman found shot in the back of his own claim. Mr. Tom Henley fallen down a shaft on a Sunday afternoon when no one was working. Mrs. Annalise Calloway and her 4-year-old daughter dead inside of 1 week of going to Mr. Marsh with a list. And Mr. Ezra Marsh himself dead inside of 3 months of writing the last entry in this book. And Mr. Old Hank Brennan, the Irish liveryman who sent me up Copper Ridge in a blizzard last week, dead in his own stable 5 days ago, for the sin of pointing a frightened girl toward an honest door. Della took a breath. The square was so quiet you could hear the harness leather creak on Pike's horse. She held up the book. "This is the book," she said. "It has been against my ribs from Boston to this hotel square. Every name I have just spoken is in it, and every man and every woman in this town who has been told for years that their friend or their husband or their father died in an accident. Please come forward, because the names of your dead are in this book, and I am going to read them out loud right now." Silas stepped up beside her and opened the book, and he began to read. The miners began to come forward. 1, then 2, then 6. Then a man in his 60s with his hat in his hand and tears running down his face, who said in a thick voice, "That is my brother. Henry Bowman is my brother." And then a woman in a faded shawl whose name was Henley, who said quietly, "I lost my house in a week. I lost my husband in a day. I have known for 10 years. I have known, and I could not say it out loud because no one would have believed me." The crowd in the square was growing. 60 people, 80, 100. Word had moved across Silver Creek the way fire moves across dry grass. Hollis Blackwood on the porch of his hotel saw the moment slipping. Hollis Blackwood had been buying men for 30 years, and he knew the exact moment when a bought town stops being bought. He raised his hand to the men on the roof of the assay office. The men on the roof of the assay office raised their rifles. What happened next happened in less than 15 seconds, and Della Whitfield would carry every one of those 15 seconds with her every day for the rest of her life. Wyatt Calloway saw the rifles on the roof come up before anyone else did. Wyatt Calloway had been waiting for this moment for 5 years. Wyatt Calloway took 2 long running steps toward the hotel porch with his Colt already coming out of the holster, and he yelled a warning to halt without ever taking his eyes off Hollis Blackwood. And then the first shot from the assay office roof took Wyatt high in the chest, just under the collarbone, and Wyatt went down hard onto one knee in the snow of the square. But Wyatt did not stay down. Wyatt Calloway, on one knee in the snow, with his shirt going dark, lifted the Colt with a hand that should not have been able to lift anything sighted through the pane on Hollis Blackwood, standing on the porch of the Silver Creek Hotel, and put one bullet through the heart of the man who had murdered his sister-in-law and his 4-year-old niece in November of 1880. Hollis Blackwood made a small surprise sound. He looked down at his own chest. He sat down on the top step of his hotel porch as if he had only meant to rest a moment. Then he tipped slowly sideways, and he did not move again. The hired men on the roof of the assay office got off 2 more shots before the federal deputies in the doorways below them put them down. The 6 hired men on the hotel porch dropped their rifles and put their hands in the air the moment they saw their employer go over. It was over. 15 seconds. It was over. Holt Calloway was already on the ground in the snow beside his middle brother, both of his big hands pressed to the wound under Wyatt's collarbone, as if pressure alone could keep his brother in the world a little longer. Della was on her knees on the other side. Silas was there with the book pressed to his chest like a child. Marshal Pike took his hat off and held it against his ribs. Wyatt looked up at his older brother. His eyes were already going far away, but they were clear. They were the clearest they had been in 5 years. Brother Wyatt said, I told you. I told you I was going to pay it back. Wyatt, no. No, brother, stay with me. We are going home. We are going up the ridge. Silas can do this. Silas read the books. Holt. Holt, listen. Listen. I have been carrying her for 5 years. Annalise. Lily. I have been carrying them. I am tired, brother. I am so tired. And I want you to tell them, when you see them on the other side of this thing, I want you to tell them I am sorry I did not move faster in 1879. Will you do that for me? Will you tell them? I will tell them. Wyatt, I will tell them, but not today. Not today, brother. Stay. Wyatt Calloway smiled. It was the smile of the brother who had always been the one with the bad jokes. It was a tired smile and a peaceful smile, and it was the last smile Holt Calloway would ever see on his middle brother's face. Holt, she is the one. The girl in the navy dress, she is the one. Do not waste it. Do not waste a day of it. Promise me. I promise. Wyatt, I promise. Live, brother. Live for both of us now, Wyatt. Calloway closed his eyes in the snow of the Silver Creek Hotel square, and he did not open them again. The hand that was holding Holt's hand went slowly soft. Holt Calloway bent his head over his brother, and the only sound in the square, for a long moment, was the sound of 100 Silver Creek miners taking off their hats one by one. They buried Wyatt Calloway on Copper Ridge a week later, under a tall pine that looked down across the whole long valley where he had once been a deputy United States Marshal and where he had finally finished the case he had started 5 years before. Silas dug the grave himself. He would not let Holt do it. Della stood beside Holt at the burial in a black dress that one of the Silver Creek widows had pressed into her hands at the hotel square that day, saying, "Only take it, child. You are family now, the way only a frontier woman can say a thing like that and mean every word of it." Holt did not weep at the grave. He had not wept for Annalise either in the end. But he stood at the foot of the new mound a long time after the others had walked back to the cabin, and Della stood with him, and the wind moved the high pines, and somewhere very far below them, a hawk turned a lazy circle over the valley. "This mountain does not lie," Holt said quietly. "People do," Della said. Spring came late that year, and it came soft. The first crocuses pushed up through the snow at the south side of the cabin in the second week of April. By the end of the month, the lower meadows were green for the first time. Marshal Pike sent a long letter from Helena saying that Hollis Blackwood's estate had been opened and the territorial court was already returning money to 14 Silver Creek families, and that Annalise Calloway and Lily Calloway had been formally listed as victims of unlawful death by the court, which was the closest a frontier court could come to giving Holt back what had been taken from him. In the second week of May, on a morning so blue and so clean that Della Whitfield said it looked like the world had just been washed, for company, Holt Calloway and Della Whitfield were married under the tall pine where Wyatt was buried. There was no preacher. The preacher could not get up the trail in time. Marshal Thaddeus Pike said the words instead with his federal star pinned to his black coat and his hat in his hand. Silas Calloway gave the bride away. He took her hand at the door of the cabin and walked her the 200 yards through the wildflower meadow to the place under the pine where his older brother was waiting, and just before he placed her hand in Holt's hand, he leaned down to her ear and said, "Welcome to the family, sister," the way Wyatt would have said it. Della wore a simple white dress she had cut down from a bolt of cloth in the Silver Creek dry goods store. She wore the cameo brooch of her mother at her throat. Copper, the old golden retriever, walked beside her in the meadow, as if he had been doing it his whole life, his shoulder healed. Now his old gold coat shining in the May sun. When it came time for Holt to say his words, he looked down at her and he said in front of Silas and Marshal Pike and the Henley widow and a few of the Silver Creek miners who had ridden up to bear witness the only vow he had ever known how to make. "A Calloway keeps his word. Della, before God, before my brothers, before this mountain, I am giving you my word. I will love you, I will protect you. It will stand beside you until the day they put me in the ground next to my brother under this tree. That is the promise. That is the only one I have." Della said her own words back to him, soft, and then Marshall Pike said the last words. And then Holt Calloway bent down and kissed his wife under the pine where his brother was buried, and the small wedding party clapped, and Copper barked once for the joy of it. That night, the cabin door closed softly behind them. Outside, the first warm stars of May came out one by one over the long, quiet country. Inside, the candle on the small pine table burned down low and a new life on Copper Ridge began. The years came after that, the way years come on a mountain in seasons and births, in losses, in slow accumulations of small good things. In the winter of 1884 to 1885, only 10 months after Della Whitfield first knocked on the cabin door in a navy dress, another blizzard came down on Copper Ridge, and inside the cabin, Della Calloway gave birth to her first child. Holt could not get down the mountain to fetch the doctor, and Silas was already away in St. Louis at his second year of law school, and so Holt and Della did the thing alone, the way frontier people had always done it, with Silas's medical books open on the table, and Holt's big shaking hands doing what they were told. The child was a boy, a strong boy. Holt held him in his arms for the first time, and his hands, which had not trembled, holding a rifle and 15 seconds of gunfire on a town square, trembled now. "What shall we name him?" Della whispered. Wyatt, Holt said without a moment's pause. "Wyatt Calloway. So my brother lives in this house again." 2 years later, in 1887, came a daughter. Della asked very softly if they might call her Lily. Holt could not answer at first. Then he nodded once, and the second Lily Calloway came into the world that spring, and Holt Calloway sat by the cradle the first night with his hand on the baby's blanket and let 3 years of grief finally finish leaving him. Silas finished his law school and came home with a degree. He hung his shingle in Helena and spent the next 30 years defending minors and mail-order brides and small homesteaders against the kind of men Hollis Blackwood had been. He married a school teacher from Chicago named Beatrice in 1889, and they had 4 children of their own, and every Thanksgiving the whole Calloway family came up to the ridge and crowded into the cabin that had grown by then into a long ranch house with 2 new rooms. In 1893, a third child came, a second boy, and Della asked Holt if they might name him for the federal marshal who had ridden into Silver Creek with them on that noon in February of 1884. Holt said yes before she had finished asking. Tobias Pike Calloway, Marshal Pike, white in the temples now and slow in the saddle, but still riding, came up the ridge to see the boy that summer and stood by the cradle for a long time without speaking. Old Hank Brennan's grave they had moved up to Copper Ridge in the spring of 1885 and laid beside Wyatt's under the tall pine with a cross of carved cottonwood that said only "Old Hank Brennan, friend," to the Calloways, who pointed a frightened girl toward an honest door. Copper, the old golden retriever, lived to be 19 years old, which is a long time for any dog and a longer time for a working dog on a mountain. And when he finally lay down in the sun on the porch one September afternoon in 1898 and did not get up, they buried him beside Wyatt and old Hank under the pine. The young Wyatt, who was 13 years old by then, sat by the dog's grave for most of an afternoon. When Holt came to fetch him for supper, the boy looked up and said, "Papa, why does everything good have to die?" And Holt sat down on the ground beside his son and put one big arm around him and said, "Son, the good things do not die. The good things go ahead of us, and they wait. That is all. That is the only thing this mountain has ever taught me. The good things wait." 30 years passed. It was the fall of 1914. The world far away from Copper Ridge had begun to lose its mind in a war Della read about in the Helena papers. But on the ridge, the cottonwoods were turning gold along the creek, and the wildflowers were finishing their long summer. And Della Calloway was 52 years old and still wore her mother's cameo brooch at her throat every single day. She stood on the porch of the Wong Ranch house that had grown out of the original cabin, watching the late afternoon sun slide down behind the western peaks. Her honey hair had silver in it now, the way Holt's dark hair had silver in it, and the lines at the corners of her eyes were the lines of a woman who had laughed a great deal in her life and had wept only when there was something worth weeping for. Holt Calloway, 63 years old, came up the porch steps with a small grandson on his shoulders. The grandson was 8. His name was Caleb Wyatt Calloway, the first son of the first Wyatt, the doctor who lived now in Helena and came up the ridge every summer with his own family. The boy was kicking his boot heels gently against Holt's chest and laughing. Holt set the boys down on the porch beside his grandmother. The boy ran inside where Marshal Thaddeus Pike, 85 years old now, and walking with a cane but still somehow alive, was sitting by the hearth telling stories to the younger grandchildren about how he had once ridden into a town called Silver Creek behind a girl in a navy dress with the longest list of crimes on a single piece of paper that any federal marshal in Montana had ever carried. Della reached out without looking and laid her hand on Holt's forearm. Holt covered her hand with his own. "Do you remember," Holt said quietly, "the night you knocked on the door?" "I remember," she said. "Do you remember what you whispered to me when I picked you up out of the snow?" "I never knew what I whispered. I was 9 years old in my own head. I thought I was dying. You whispered, 'Mother, I have come home.' I heard you. I did not understand it then. I think I understand it now." Della turned her face up to look at her husband. Cold light of the October sun on Copper Ridge. His hair was almost white. His eyes were still the color of mountain honey held to a candle. "I came home," she said. "I did not know it had your name on the door, but I came home. And I have been home for 30 years. Built this with our own hands," Holt said. "Built this with our own hands," she answered. Behind them inside the long ranch house, the laughter of children rose and fell. Silas Calloway, 57 years old, the lawyer of Helena, was telling one of his own grandchildren the story of how their great-uncle Wyatt had once put a bad man in the ground with the very last bullet of his life on a town square in February of 1884. Beatrice was helping Della's daughter Lily set the long supper table. The young Dr. Wyatt was on his knees by the fire showing Tobias Pike Calloway how to whittle a whistle out of green willow. Marshal Pike was laughing his old slow laugh. Out under the tall pine on the ridge above the ranch house, 3 graves and 1 dog's grave lay in a row, and the wildflowers that Della had planted there every spring for 30 years were finishing their last bloom of the season. Wyatt Calloway, Old Hank Brennan, Copper. And the year before, a 4th and 5th had been added when Annalise and little Lily had been brought up at last from the old plot in Silver Creek and reburied where they belonged on the mountain that did not lie beside the men who had finally avenged them. Holt Calloway looked down at his wife on the porch of the house they had built together, and at the long valley going gold below them, and at the cottonwoods turning along the creek, and at the high western peaks taking on the rose color of sundown. "Winter always ends," he said softly. "Even the longest one. Even the longest one," she said. The sun went down behind the Bitterroots. The first cold star came out over Copper Ridge the same way the first cold stars had come out the night. A frightened girl in a navy dress had walked between 2 pines bent toward each other, like 2 old men praying, and had climbed a mountain in the worst storm in 20 winters, and had knocked on a door that had not been opened to a stranger in 3 years, and had heard a man say the words, "Get into my cabin." It's freezing outside, and had whispered into his coat that she had come home. She had been right. She had come home. And the home she had come to had lasted 30 years, and it would last 30 more, and the names of the people who had built it would be carved into the inside wall of the old part of the cabin where Holt Calloway had carved them himself the day his first son was born. We built this home. That was all that needed to be said. That was all that ever needed to be said. Good night, friends. And remember, winter always ends, even the longest one.